All right, so now moving on to a specific part of the nervous system, we're going to be covering senses. So the eye, what you see here, to start off, the lacrimal duct is where tears come from. The pupil is the dark black area of the eye that light will enter. Pupil size is controlled by the autonomic nervous system via a series of small musculature. The sclera is the white of the eye, and the iris is the colored portion of the eye. Now, the eye itself can be divided into essentially two compartments. We have the front and then the rear area. The front area is the aqueous humor, and then the back area is the vitreous humor. These are going to be two very different compositions, but they serve different functions. Now, you'll see a couple different layers here. You don't need to know them in depth, but the idea is light enters through here, goes through the pupil, it comes through the vitreous humor, and eventually it makes contact with the back of the eye, where there are highly specialized neurons. Okay, they're called rods and cones. They specialize in different types of light and work well in different types of environments. And basically, they are sensory receptors, and those sensory receptors feed the optic nerve, and the optic nerve then sends the signal to the brain for processing. Next, this is the ear. So the ear can be divided into three components. We have the outer ear that we basically can see from the outside, the middle ear, and the inner ear. The middle ear and the inner ear is where the real magic happens. Now, if you look at the outer ear, though, it's got a very interesting shape. The outer ear literally exists to help funnel sound to the middle ear, okay? It's almost like the auricle, also sometimes called the pinna, the big rounded part of our ear, literally exists almost like a reflector for sound. So sound gets pushed through the external auditory meatus, and meatus is just a fancy way of saying canal, and it will hit what's called the tympanic membrane, which is also known as the eardrum. The eardrum is connected to the three smallest bones in our body, and when I say small, I mean ridiculously small. These bones, if you wanted to observe them, you definitely need a magnifying glass to make out detail on them. They're called the malleus, incus, and the stapes. They are also sometimes commonly referred to as the hammer, anvil, and stirrup. If you notice, the stapes looks like a stirrup. The malleus is called the hammer. The incus would be the anvil. So basically what happens is the tympanic membrane receives sound vibrations in the air, and this moves the malleus, which articulates with the incus. So it's going to cause a movement of the incus. This movement of the incus causes a movement of the stapes, okay? And this is where the magic really happens, because as the stapes moves, the stapes is kind of plugged into a very special space, okay? And it's attached into the inner ear, it's called the bony labyrinth, okay? And this kind of has two components. We have the cochlea and the vestibule, okay? And the vestibule and the semicircular canals you see here do a big part of our coordination. So this is why the ear is actually involved in coordination. And the cochlea itself, sometimes you'll hear this referred to as the snail organ. It's actually filled with a fluid. So this fluid gets moved as the stapes moves, okay? And there's very special literally called hair cells in here, and they're actually sensory neurons that collect information about how the fluid's moving. So, for example, the further the fluid moves, the louder the sound. And that information gets fed to the cochlear nerve, which collectively with the nerve that attaches to, that receives input from the vestibule, they collectively are actually attached, come from the same spot in the brain. They're called the vestibulocochlear nerve, and they're cranial nerve 8. Okay. You'll also notice it's very important that the middle ear is actually connected to the rest of the entire pharynx. So the eustachian tube connects to the pharynx, and this is important for helping control pressure. In fact, there's a series of very small muscles involved with this. So whenever, like, for instance, you are on a plane taking off or on a drive and you're going up mountains or taking off, your ears are popping, it's relieving the pressure from this area via the eustachian tube. So again, function of the eye. Generally, you should be able to discuss the way light travels through. So through the cornea, the aqueous humor, the pupil, through the lens, vitreous humor, to the optic nerve, and then the brain. Same thing with the ear, okay? Again, very simple. You should also be able to generally have an idea of what part of the ear each of this anatomy is associated with. Blepharo is eyelid. Iro or irid is iris. Keratoe is cornea in the eye. Now, if you remember from the skin, we also use keratoe in relation to like keratinocytes. It generally means like a hard tissue. But when we talk about the eye and we talk about issues of the eye using keratoe, we're explicitly talking about cornea. Ophthalmo is eye, like ophthalmoscope. Opto means vision. Retina, retino is retina. Sclero talks about the sclera, the white of the eye. Combining forms from the ear. Audio is hearing. Maringo is eardrum. Otto is ear, so otoscope. Tympano is middle ear. So this is important to differentiate the eardrum. While the eardrum is considered part of the middle ear, tympano is specifically talking about the whole area, whereas Maringo is specifically talking about the eardrum or the actual tympanic membrane. Suffixes, again, a lot of these we should have seen by now. Metry is measurement. Plegia is paralysis. We talk about the eye. Blepharitis, blepharoplasty, blepharoptosis. So these are all conditions involving the eyelid. Iridectomy is removal of the iris. Iridoplegia is paralysis. Iritis is inflammation. Keratometer, this is measuring the hardness of the cornea. Ophthalmic, ophthalmologist. So when you go and get your eye exam done yearly, you go to the ophthalmologist, the vision doctor. So what we see here is blepharitis, ophthalmoscope, optic, optometry, retinal, retinitis, scleral, scleritis. So again, we've really seen a lot of these suffixes at this point. So ophthalmoscope, this is what the doctor or optometrist uses to look into your eye. Basically, they can look through and they can see the condition of the back of your eye. They can see the optic nerve. They can see the retina. They can see the blood vessels and assess the health of the eye. Audiologist, audiology. Again, a lot of these are definitely things we can really know by now. So myringitis, inflammation of the tympanic membrane, myringioplasty, myringotomy is removal. Otitis. Now, otitis is used in like otitis media, which basically just means ear infection. So what is this? A myringotomy. You're basically cutting a hole in the tympanic membrane. This is a surgical treatment for an extreme ear infection. So remember, otto is to basically refer to the ear. So an otoscope is a scope to look into the ear. Tympanic, remember, is specifically only applied to the entirety of the middle ear. So here's the otoscope. Again, with the otoscope, we're looking in. You're looking for potentially signs of infection, anything out of the ordinary in both the canal and with the membrane, because the membrane is slightly see-through, so you can make out, if there's issues on the other side of it as well. So what's the instrument used in hearing? An audiometer. Moving on to the eye. So astigmatism, cataracts, detached retinas, glaucoma, hyperopia. This is commonly referred to as farsightedness. And LASIK is a procedure. It is laser-assisted in situ keratomyolysis. Cataracts are what happens when the eye develops a cloudiness to them, and it's actually, some people think that there's like something on the outside of your eye, but it's actually not. It's something developing on the inside of the eye, and it's associated with degeneration of the eye itself. So continuing, macular degeneration. Macular degeneration in the U.S. is the leading cause of blindness. Myopia is nearsightedness. Optometrist, presbyopia. So what we see here is a cataract. You see the cloudiness in the middle of the eye. You might think that there's something covering or a new layer of something, but it's internal of the eye. Detached retinas, literally what happens is the retina becomes detached from the rest of the eye. If it's not flat and directly attached to the layer below it, called the choroid, we essentially will not get vision in that eye. So ear otitis media, tinnitus. Tinnitus is just ringing of the ear. So looking here, this is the eardrum. Notice how I said it's sort of see-through. You can kind of get an idea of the colors behind it. What you see here is otitis media, or an ear infection. Notice how it's red, it's inflamed, it's nasty looking, and you can't really see through anymore because everything is inflamed. So abbreviations: ARMD, AST, ENT, IOP, OM, and OPTH. So what's the abbreviation for the specialist, an otolaryngologist? It's an ENT, sometimes also referred to as an ear, nose, and throat doctor.